I married a woman in white. Only later did I find out. I was husband number 2, and that dress was already waiting for husband number 3. It started on an ordinary Sunday afternoon. I was digging through our closet, looking for an old jacket I hadn't worn in years, when my hand brushed against the plastic cover of her wedding dress. She had always insisted on keeping it, saying it was too special to part with. I didn't think much of it. Lots of women keep their wedding dresses. But something felt off. The zipper of the bag was slightly open. Curiosity got the best of me, and I peeked inside. That's when I noticed a folded piece of paper sticking out of the pocket stitched into the gown. At first, I thought it might be a receipt or some fabric sample from the tailor, but it wasn't. It was a photograph. My heart sank when I unfolded it. There she was, my wife, in that exact same dress, standing under an arch of flowers. But the man beside her wasn't me. Before I dive deeper into this story, let me just say, if you enjoy shocking real-life stories like this, make sure you hit that subscribe button so you don't miss the next one. Trust me, things are about to get darker than you can imagine. Now back to that moment that I sat on the floor of the closet, staring at the photo like it was some cursed artifact. My first thought was, maybe it's her cousin's wedding? Maybe she just tried the dress on as a joke? But no, her hand was locked around his arm. She was smiling that same smile I thought was mine. The kind of smile she gave me on our wedding day. And the way the man was looking at her. Yeah, that wasn't a cousin. That was a groom. My blood ran cold. I couldn't breathe. My chest felt like it was being crushed. Questions stormed my brain. Who was he? When was this? Why had she never mentioned it? And more importantly, why the hell was she wearing the exact same dress at my wedding? I shoved the photo back in the pocket, zipped up the cover, and sat there in silence for what felt like hours. She was in the kitchen cooking dinner, humming like nothing was wrong. Meanwhile, I was sitting there with evidence that the woman I loved might be living a lie that I couldn't confront her right away. Not without more information. If I stormed in there waving that photo, she'd probably spin some story, maybe even cry, and I'd end up doubting my own eyes. I knew her. She was smart, quick with words, and knew how to twist emotions. No, I needed to be sure before I said a word. So I played it cool. I walked into the kitchen, kissed her on the cheek, and sat down for dinner like everything was normal. Inside, though, I was shaking. My fork scraped against the plate, and my hands trembled as I pretended to listen to her talk about work. She had no clue that the foundation of our marriage had just cracked wide open. That night, as she slept peacefully next to me, I lay awake staring at the ceiling. I replayed every conversation we'd ever had about her past. I realized something strange. She'd never talked much about her life before me. Just vague comments, half-stories, things that didn't quite line up. Back then, I thought she was just private, maybe shy about her past. Now I wondered if she was hiding something much bigger. The next morning, when she left for work, I went back to the closet. I pulled out the dress, laid it on the bed, and stared at it like it was mocking me. That gown, the one I once thought symbolized our forever, now felt like a costume. A costume she had worn for someone else long before me. I took the photo out again. This time, I studied every detail. The man was tall, broad-shouldered, clean-shaven. He had one of those fake, too perfect smiles. They were standing in front of a floral arch. Behind them, I noticed something that made my stomach turn, a sign with their names on it. Hers was the same. His? A name I didn't recognize. And that's when the thought hit me. If she could hide an entire marriage from me, what else could she be hiding? I needed answers. And I wasn't going to get them by asking her directly. No, this called for something I never thought I'd have to do in my marriage. I was going to investigate my own wife. That decision changed everything. After that night, my life split into two versions. The version she saw, calm, loving husband going about his day. And the version inside my head, an investigator quietly building a case against the woman he thought he knew. The first thing I noticed were the timelines. We'd been together for almost 4 years, married for 2. But when I looked back at conversations we'd had early in our relationship, things didn't add up. She had once told me she'd never been married because she was waiting for the right one. Another time she claimed she almost got married once, but backed out at the last second. Both couldn't be true. Back then I brushed it off. Now, those words felt like cracks in a carefully painted wall that I started paying closer attention. One evening, she got a phone call while we were watching TV. Normally, she'd pick up right there next to me. But this time, she jumped up, grabbed her phone, and walked to the bedroom. shutting the door behind her. My gut twisted. 10 minutes later, she came back, smiling, saying it was just work. The problem? She didn't have the kind of job that involved late-night emergencies. The next morning, while she was in the shower, her phone buzzed on the nightstand. The screen lit up with a name I didn't recognize. My hand hovered over it, but I didn't touch. I wasn't ready to cross that line yet. I needed another way. That's when I remembered something. Months ago, when we bought our house together, she had used her email on some of the documents. At the time, I thought nothing of it. But now, I dug through our shared folder on my laptop, and there it was, her old email address, the one she never used around me. I tried logging in with a few password guesses, and to my shock, it worked. Don't ask me how. Maybe she reused an old password I knew. But suddenly, I was inside a version of her life I wasn't supposed to see. At first, it was boring: newsletters, shopping receipts, random spam. But then I found a folder labeled legal. My pulse spiked. Inside were scans of documents, emails with a lawyer, and even court records. And right there, in plain black and white, was proof. She had been married before. The divorce had been finalized 3 years before I met her, which meant she was free when she met me. But what stunned me wasn't just the fact that she'd been married. It was the reason. The papers mentioned something about division of inheritance assets. Inheritance? She had never told me about any inheritance. Suddenly, the puzzle started to form an image. She wasn't just hiding a marriage. She had used it, and possibly me, for money. That night, I stared at her across the dinner table. She laughed, she talked, she teased me about forgetting to take out the trash. And the whole time, I kept thinking, who are you really? I didn't confront her yet. Not because I was afraid, but because I needed more. One slip up on my part, and she'd shut down, erase her tracks, maybe even run. If she had already hidden one marriage, what would stop her from disappearing again? So I became more careful. I started leaving subtle questions in our conversations, asking about her family, her past, the town she grew up in. Sometimes she'd answer smoothly. Other times, her eyes would flicker, her tone would shift, and I could tell she was making something up on the spot. One night, she told me her parents had never really approved of her past boyfriends. That was strange, because in another conversation months earlier, she had claimed her parents loved an ex and almost treated him like family. Which was it? Every lie was a thread, and I was pulling at them one by one. A week later, I stumbled onto something that made my skin crawl. I went through our shared bank statements online, looking for anything unusual. Most of it was groceries, bills, normal stuff. But buried between the charges was a payment to a wedding planning service. Dated 5 years ago. 5 years ago, I didn't even know her. My chest tightened as I stared at the screen. She had paid thousands. That wasn't some canceled booking. That was a wedding. And here was the cruel part. The name on the invoice matched the man from the photograph. In that moment, the weight of everything came crashing down on me. This wasn't paranoia. This wasn't overthinking. She had lied to me from the very beginning. Lied about her past, lied about her marriage, lied about who she really was. But I wasn't ready to blow it up yet. Not until I understood why. Because the way those documents read, this wasn't just about love or heartbreak. It was about money. Inheritance. Assets. That's when I knew I wasn't just her husband. I was part of a plan. And plans can be broken. I couldn't shake the feeling that my marriage wasn't real. Every smile, every "I love you" from her lips replayed in my mind like a performance. And the more I dug, the more I realized it wasn't just a feeling. It was fact. One night, while she was asleep, I returned to that hidden email account. This time, I went deeper. Buried under folders of receipts and spam, I found a string of conversations with her lawyer. The subject lines read, inheritance division, asset transfer, and marriage settlement. My pulse hammered as I clicked through. That's when I saw his name again. The man from the photograph. The ex-husband. The emails revealed a messy legal battle. He had inherited property from his parents, and she had fought tooth and nail to get her hands on part of it through the marriage. The documents didn't mention love, commitment, or family. They mentioned assets, property, and entitlement. But here's where it got worse. One of the emails contained an attachment, a scanned letter written by the ex-husband's attorney. In it, there was a warning. Your client appears to have entered this marriage under questionable intent. Questionable intent. Those two words hit me like a freight train. It wasn't just me overthinking. Even lawyers suspected she had used him. And judging by how quickly she moved on and married me after, maybe I was just the next step in her plan that I needed confirmation from outside my own digging. Something that couldn't be brushed off as paranoia. That's when I decided to track down the ex-husband at first. I wasn't sure how. I only had a name and a few scraps of information. But the thing about court records? They're public. I spent hours one night scrolling through legal databases until I found it. His full name, address at the time of the divorce, and even details about the estate she had tried to claim. My hands shook as I scribbled down the information. Was I really about to meet the man who had been in my exact position before me? Would he even want to talk? The next morning, I drove to the address. It was a small, modest house on the edge of town. The yard was overgrown, the paint chipped. This wasn't the home of a man living off a massive inheritance. This was the home of someone who had lost. I sat in my car for nearly 20 minutes, debating. What if he slammed the door in my face? What if he still loved her? Or worse, what if he warned her that I had come? Finally, I gathered my courage and walked up to the door. My knock echoed through the quiet street. A moment later, the door creaked open, and there he was, the man from the photo. He looked older, thinner, with dark circles under his eyes. He wasn't the polished groom I'd seen beside her in that picture. He was someone broken down, weary. Yes? He asked, his voice rough. My throat went dry, but I managed to say it. I'm her husband. Now, for a long second, he just stared at me. His jaw tightened. And then, instead of anger, his shoulders slumped. Almost like he'd been expecting me. Come in, he said quietly. Inside, the house smelled like stale coffee and old papers. He led me to a living room cluttered with stacks of documents, manila folders, and unopened mail. He gestured for me to sit, then dropped heavily into a chair across from me. You found out, didn't you? He said, not even needing me to explain. I nodded. The dress, the photo, the emails. I know about the marriage. I know about the inheritance. For the first time in weeks, I felt like someone else understood the nightmare I was living. He leaned back, rubbing his face. You're not the first. And unless you do something, you won't be the last. Those words sent a chill through my veins. She hadn't just lied to him. She hadn't just lied to me. This was a cycle, a pattern, and I was standing right in the middle of it. Sitting in that man's living room, I felt like I had stepped into my own future. He wasn't just her ex-husband. He was a warning. He poured himself a cup of coffee, hands shaking slightly, and offered me one. I declined. My stomach was already in knots. He sat back down, looked me straight in the eye, and said, She's not who you think she is. She never was. I leaned forward, my voice low. Tell me everything. And he did. He told me about how they met. How she had swept into his life when he was at his most vulnerable, after his parents passed away, leaving him a large inheritance. She was charming, attentive, said all the right things. Within months, they were married. First, it felt perfect. She pushed for the wedding quickly, claimed she wanted to help him through grief. But the way he described it, she wasn't comforting him. She was positioning herself. She insisted on handling paperwork, encouraged him to trust her with the details, even suggested moving assets into joint accounts to make life easier. My fists clenched as I listened. I could picture it, because I'd lived through a softer version of the same script. He told me about the arguments that started once he began to notice her strange behavior. Secret phone calls, mysterious expenses, disappearing for hours without explanation. When he confronted her, she cried, accused him of being paranoid, and then flipped the narrative to make him feel guilty. And then came the lawyers. Apparently, she had tried to claim part of the inheritance as marital property. The case dragged on for months. She played the victim, painting him as controlling, even dangerous. By the time it ended, he had lost not just money, but his reputation. Friends drifted away. Family stopped calling. She left me hollow, he said, his voice breaking for the first time. Not just financially. She drained everything. My trust, my hope. By the time she walked out, I didn't even recognize myself. I sat there in silence, my blood boiling. Part of me wanted to walk out, to run home and confront her that second. But the other part knew I had to keep listening. Then he leaned closer, lowering his voice. And if you think you're the last, you're wrong. My chest tightened. What do you mean? She's planning again, he said. I don't know who the guy is this time, but I've heard whispers. A friend of mine still works at the same law office. She's already asked about certain clauses, about prenuptial loopholes. She's laying the groundwork for another wedding. I froze. Another wedding? My wife, the woman who kissed me every morning, who laughed at my jokes, who shared my bed, was already setting the stage to replace me. It felt like the floor gave out under me. She uses the dress, he added bitterly. The same one every time. It's not nostalgia. It's her trophy, her symbol. She puts it on, plays the role, takes what she wants, and when she's done, she sheds the man but keeps the gown. That image made me sick. Suddenly, that beautiful dress hanging in our closet wasn't just a lie. It was a weapon. That I asked him the question that had been burning in my chest since I knocked on his door. Why didn't you warn me sooner? Why let me walk into the same trap? He looked down, ashamed. Because I didn't know who she'd choose next. And honestly, I didn't think anyone would believe me. She's good at making herself look innocent. You probably wouldn't have believed me either, not back then. He wasn't wrong. If a stranger had told me all this before, I would have laughed it off. But now I couldn't deny it. I had seen the photo. I had read the emails. And now, I was hearing the truth straight from the man who lived it before me. I stood up, pacing the room. My mind was racing. She wasn't just unfaithful. She wasn't just dishonest. She was strategic, cold, calculated. The ex-husband leaned back in his chair, studying me. So what are you going to do? I didn't answer right away. My head was spinning, but one thing had crystallized in my mind. I couldn't just walk away quietly. Not this time. If she was planning a third wedding, then it was time to make sure the performance ended. And I was going to be the one to close the curtain. Driving home from the ex-husband's house, my hands gripped the steering wheel so tight my knuckles turned white. His words echoed in my head. She's planning again. I didn't tell him, but in that moment I made a decision. I wasn't just going to leave her. I wasn't just going to survive this. I was going to turn the game around. But to do that, I needed proof. Not just suspicions, not just his story, but undeniable evidence that could expose her. Evidence strong enough that even her silver tongue couldn't twist it. So, I started quietly building my case. The first step was surveillance. Nothing illegal, just subtle, careful observation. I bought a small voice recorder, the kind you can hide in plain sight. I slipped it under the passenger seat of her car, where she'd never think to look. Every time she went out shopping or meeting a friend, I turned it on. The first few recordings were boring. Grocery store chatter, radio music, nothing out of the ordinary. But then came one night when she left, saying she was meeting coworkers for drinks. I hit record, waited until she left, and sat in the dark with headphones on. My chest tightened as I heard her voice. Clear as day, but she wasn't talking to coworkers. She was talking to someone else, a man. The conversation wasn't romantic in the obvious sense, but it was chilling. She was discussing financial terms. She used words like joint account, investment, and even settlement. The man laughed nervously in the background, and she reassured him with that same honeyed tone she used on me. My blood boiled. It was the same script. That was the first piece of evidence. The second came from technology. While she slept one night, I opened her laptop. I'd never crossed that line before, but now the stakes were too high. She had saved passwords on her browser, and I used them to log into an old cloud storage account. Inside, I found folders of photos. At first, just normal memories, vacations, dinners, casual shots. But then I saw a hidden folder labeled Archive. My stomach dropped. Clicking it open, I froze. It was a collection of her past weddings. Not just one, not just two. Multiple sets of photos with her in the same dress, standing beside different men. Each folder had a name, each one different. The backgrounds changed: beaches, banquet halls, rustic barns. But the constant detail was her, always in that gown, always smiling like she'd won a prize. My hands shook as I scrolled through them. I wasn't husband number 2. I wasn't husband number 3. I didn't even know which number I was anymore. The rage inside me nearly consumed me, but I forced myself to stay calm. I couldn't blow my cover yet, not until I had everything lined up. So, I began documenting everything. I backed up the recordings, copied the photos, and stored them on an external drive she'd never find. I reached out to a lawyer, explaining only part of the situation, and made sure my finances were locked down, my accounts secure. But I didn't stop there. I started planting little seeds. When she mentioned going out, I'd casually ask, "Meeting with your friend again?" and watched the flicker of panic in her eyes before she smoothed it over. I left documents on the kitchen counter that looked like financial statements, just to see if she'd take the bait. And she did. More than once. I caught her rifling through them when she thought I wasn't home. That told me everything I needed to know. She wasn't just planning. She was hunting. And I was the prey she was getting ready to discard. But not this time. This time, I wasn't going to be the clueless victim who signed away his life while she smiled in a white dress. This time, I was going to be the one holding the strings. And soon, very soon, she'd realize the stage she thought she controlled was actually a trap I'd built just for her. By the time I finished backing up the recordings and photos, my heart was no longer heavy with confusion. It was focused, clear. I wasn't stumbling in the dark anymore. I had proof. And now, it was about using it. But I knew I couldn't do this alone. So I reached out to the one person who had already lived this nightmare, her ex-husband. I called him late one night, after she had fallen asleep, and asked him to meet me again. This time, he agreed without hesitation. When we sat down together, I laid everything out. The photos from her cloud, the recordings from her car, the receipts I'd found. He stared at the screen in silence, his jaw tightening with every click. Finally, he said, "She hasn't changed. She'll never change." That's when we started planning that we didn't want just gossip. We wanted undeniable evidence that would ruin her carefully crafted mask. So we decided to set a trap, one that would catch her in the act of scheming for her next wedding. The ex-husband still had contacts. An old friend at a law firm, a cousin who worked in event planning, even a mutual acquaintance who had once attended one of her past ceremonies. With their help, we created a network of quiet eyes watching her moves. And sure enough, the pieces fell into place. One of the first confirmations came from the event planner cousin. He called me, nervous, saying she had already reached out under a different name, inquiring about venues. My stomach dropped. She wasn't just thinking about another wedding. She was already preparing it. That was the turning point. I knew then that I had to move quickly, before she vanished and left me in ruins. So I began orchestrating what I called the stage. To her, it would look like I was planning a small, intimate renewal of our vows, a romantic gesture to celebrate our years together. Something sweet, something public, but in reality, it would be the stage for her downfall. The plan was simple but devastating. I would gather the right people in one place, close friends, her coworkers, and most importantly, the man she was lining up as her next target. With the ex-husband's help, we made sure he received a business invitation to the event, presented as a networking opportunity. Meanwhile, I compiled the evidence into a presentation that couldn't be argued away. Photos of her in the dress with different men, emails discussing inheritance, audio recordings of her manipulating financial conversations. It would all play out on a screen, in front of everyone. But to get there, I had to keep up the act at home. Every night, I smiled across the dinner table, pretended to be the loving husband, even let her lean against me on the couch, while inside I wanted to recoil. She whispered about vacations, about our future, while I pictured her whispering the same lies to someone else. The hardest part wasn't anger. It was patience, because every time I saw that dress hanging in the closet, mocking me with its perfect white fabric, I wanted to tear it apart. But I didn't, because soon, very soon, she would wear it again, and this time, it would be her undoing. To sharpen the trap, I even fed her subtle encouragement. I casually mentioned how renewing our vows would be fun, how people love those kinds of ceremonies. Her eyes lit up, and she eagerly agreed. She didn't realize she was walking into the exact performance that would destroy her. The ex-husband warned me. She'll try to twist it, even when you expose her. She's good at turning the tables. I nodded. That's why I won't just accuse her. I'll show them everything. And in that moment, sitting with him, I felt something I hadn't felt in weeks. Control. She thought she was the director of this play, pulling the strings. But the truth was, the stage was mine. And soon, everyone would see the real woman behind the perfect smile and the white dress. Once the idea of the stage took root, I couldn't think about anything else. Every moment with her felt like a countdown, ticking louder and louder, pushing me closer to the day of her downfall. But I knew one thing. I couldn't just rely on shock value. If I wanted to truly end her game, I needed airtight protection for myself first. She was smart, manipulative, and ruthless when cornered. The last thing I wanted was to expose her, only for her to twist it into another story where I looked like the villain. My first move was legal. I visited an attorney I trusted, one who had handled a family matter years ago, and laid out enough of the situation without spilling every detail. I showed him the divorce papers I'd found, the bank transfers, and hinted at her financial manipulation. He immediately set up safeguards, freezing certain joint accounts, transferring assets into my name, and drafting documents that protected me in case she tried to pull any legal trick. Walking out of his office that day, I felt lighter. For the first time, she wouldn't be able to drain me dry and vanish. But I wasn't done. The ex-husband and I kept digging. He introduced me to his old contact at the law firm, someone who confirmed my worst suspicion. She had recently reached out, asking questions about prenuptial agreements and loopholes in inheritance laws. She was planning for her next victim. The fact that she was doing this while still married to me made my skin crawl. That we now had a timeline. She wasn't just fantasizing about another wedding. She was preparing it. And if I didn't act soon, I'd be tossed aside like the men before me. I escalated. I bought a hidden camera pen and left it clipped to a stack of papers on my desk at home. Twice, I caught her snooping when she thought I was out. She carefully flipped through bank statements, photographing them with her phone before slipping everything back exactly where she found it. The footage was undeniable. She wasn't just curious. She was collecting ammunition. Another night, I left a voice recorder running in the kitchen while I stepped out to run an errand. She didn't know I'd set the trap. Minutes after I left, she was on the phone. I came back later, pressed play, and nearly dropped the device when I heard her words, "Don't worry. I'll make sure he doesn't see it coming." She never mentioned my name, but I knew. She was talking about me. That was the second piece of undeniable proof. The third came when the ex-husband's cousin, the event planner, called again. "She's booking venues under a different name," he said. "But it's definitely her. Same contact info, same requests. And guess what? She's asking about packages for a spring wedding." It was almost poetic. She was planning to walk down the aisle again, in that cursed dress. While I was secretly preparing to destroy her script, we finalized the plan. I set a date for our supposed vow renewal. I invited friends, her co-workers, even a few people she didn't know well but respected, the kind who would gossip if they saw something scandalous. The ex-husband made sure the man she was targeting received his business invitation. The pieces were falling into place. The guest list wasn't just family and friends anymore. It was an audience. At home, she was glowing. She couldn't stop smiling when I mentioned the event. She thought she had me wrapped around her finger, that I was blinded by love and desperate to keep her happy. She leaned against me one night and whispered, "You really are the perfect husband." I almost laughed in her face, because what she didn't realize was that every day she got closer to the event, every step she took in that dress, every lie she rehearsed, was leading her straight into the trap. And this time, she wouldn't walk away with a dime. The days leading up to the event felt unreal, like I was living inside a movie. Every time I looked at her, I saw two versions of the same woman: the smiling, affectionate wife she pretended to be, and the cold predator I now knew she was. And yet, she had no clue. At home, she gushed over flowers, music, and outfits, thinking our vow renewal was the ultimate proof of my devotion. I played along, nodding at her suggestions, even letting her believe she was the one in control. Meanwhile, behind the curtain, every detail was designed to corner her. That I wasn't just setting up an event. I was sharpening a blade. The ex-husband and I coordinated constantly. We chose a venue that had a large projection screen and reliable audio equipment. To everyone else, it would look like I was preparing a slideshow of our marriage highlights. In reality, that slideshow would expose years of her deception, photo after photo, email after email, proof stacked higher than her lies could reach. I enlisted quiet allies. Her closest co-worker, a woman who always seemed skeptical of her perfect stories, agreed to help discreetly. She promised to bring along a few colleagues who respected my wife but had their doubts. I knew that once the truth came out, they'd spread it like wildfire. Even more critical was securing the attendance of her next target. With the ex-husband's connections, we arranged for him to receive an invitation under the guise of a networking opportunity. From what we heard, she had already been grooming him, planting seeds of innocent friendship that would eventually blossom into her next scheme. He had no idea what he was walking into that I couldn't wait to see her face when she realized her two lives, past and future, were about to collide in front of everyone. But I wasn't reckless. I made sure the evidence was protected. Copies of everything were locked in a fireproof safe. More backups were stored with my attorney. Even if she somehow tried to destroy the presentation, the truth would live on. At night, I rehearsed my words in front of the mirror. Not angry outbursts, not bitter rants. Calm, measured statements that would cut sharper than any scream. I didn't want to look unhinged. I wanted to look like the man who finally revealed the truth. Meanwhile, she was rehearsing too, though she didn't realize it. I caught her more than once in the mirror, practicing her smile, tilting her head just right, like she was preparing for a role. It made my skin crawl. She wasn't preparing for us. She was preparing for her next performance. 3 days before the event, she laid the dress out on our bed. The same dress. The cursed dress. She smoothed the fabric with her hands, her eyes glowing with satisfaction. Still fits like a dream, she said, twirling in front of me. I forced a smile, hiding the bile rising in my throat. Because all I could think was, yes, wear it. Let everyone see you in it one last time. The night before the event, I barely slept. My mind kept flashing through scenarios. What if she walked out before I could expose her? What if the target didn't show up? What if she twisted the story even after the evidence was shown? But then I remembered the look in her ex-husband's eyes, the hollow way he spoke about what she'd done to him. And I knew, even if it didn't go perfectly, the truth had to come out. This wasn't just about revenge anymore. It was about ending her cycle. When dawn broke on the day of the event, I watched her getting ready in the mirror. She applied her makeup carefully, humming softly, while the dress hung on the door like a ghost waiting to be worn. And for the first time since finding that photo, I didn't feel powerless. I felt ready. The stage was set. And when the lights came on, her act would end forever. The day of the event arrived like a storm I'd been waiting for. From the outside, everything looked perfect. Flowers, soft music, guests in their best clothes. People whispered excitedly about how sweet it was that we were renewing our vows. Only I knew the truth. This wasn't a celebration. It was an execution of her lies. She walked into the venue wearing the dress, the same cursed gown she had worn for every one of her staged weddings. The room filled with gasps and compliments. "You look stunning. That's beautiful." And she soaked it up like a queen on her throne. I smiled beside her, the picture of a proud husband, though inside my chest burned with rage. The guest list was exactly as planned. Friends, co-workers, family. And, sitting quietly near the back, the man she had been grooming as her next target. He had no idea why he'd been invited. He thought he was there for a business opportunity. But by the end of the night, he'd see her for what she really was. The ceremony began. She stood across from me, beaming, clutching my hands as if she couldn't wait to spend forever with me. I almost laughed at the irony. If only she knew what was coming. When it was time for the slideshow, I cleared my throat. "Before we renew our vows," I said, "I want to share something with all of you." A look back at our journey. And hers. Confusion rippled across the room. She smiled uncertainly, probably expecting a montage of vacation photos and wedding highlights. But the second the screen lit up, her smile froze. The first image was her in the dress, but not with me. With her ex-husband. Gasps filled the room. She blinked rapidly, her mouth opening, then closing, like she was trying to form an excuse. Before she could speak, the second image appeared. Her again, in the same dress, this time with yet another man. Murmurs spread through the crowd like wildfire. I could feel the weight of every stare turning toward her. She tried to laugh it off. This is a mistake," she stammered, reaching for my arm. But I stepped away. The third photo appeared. Her in the same gown, smiling like a prize winner, with the man sitting in the back. His face went pale as he realized what he was seeing. Then came the emails, projected on the screen for everyone to read. Conversations with lawyers about inheritance. Requests for loopholes and prenups. Financial strategies disguised as marital planning. The room erupted in whispers and shocked gasps. Co-workers exchanged horrified glances. Family members covered their mouths. And through it all, she stood frozen, her perfect mask cracking with every new piece of evidence. Finally, I pressed play on the audio recording. Her voice filled the hall. "Don't worry. I'll make sure he doesn't see it coming." She lunged for the laptop, panicked, but the ex-husband stepped in, blocking her path. He looked her dead in the eye and said, "It's over." The silence that followed was deafening. She tried to spin it, of course. She shouted, cried, swore it was all taken out of context. But it didn't matter. The evidence was undeniable, the audience unshakable. Her coworkers turned away in disgust. Her family refused to meet her eyes. And the man she had targeted stood up, his chair scraping loudly against the floor, and walked straight out the door without a word. That was the moment her empire of lies collapsed. The dress that once made her feel untouchable was now a symbol of her downfall. Every eye in the room saw her not as a bride, not as a victim, but as a predator exposed. That I stood there calmly, my voice steady. This isn't about vows. This is about truth. And now everyone knows it. She broke down in front of them all, her tears falling, her hands trembling. But there was no sympathy left in the room. For the first time since finding that photograph, I felt free, and for the first time in her life, she had nowhere left to run. The days after the event felt strangely quiet. For so long, my life had been consumed by suspicion, rage, and planning her downfall. And now, it was over. She packed her things in silence, humiliated by the fallout. Her family refused to support her. Her coworkers cut ties. And the man she had been targeting never spoke to her again. The white dress, once her trophy, was abandoned in our closet, limp, meaningless, stripped of all power. That I didn't scream at her. I didn't even argue. I simply handed her the divorce papers my lawyer had prepared weeks earlier. She signed them without a fight, too broken to pretend anymore. Watching her walk out of the house for the last time, dragging her suitcase behind her, I didn't feel joy. I didn't feel pity. I felt release, like shackles had fallen from my wrists. But the truth is, the aftermath wasn't just about her leaving. It was about me rediscovering myself. That I took back control of my finances, rebuilt my friendships, and reconnected with family I had neglected while drowning in her lies. The ex-husband and I even stayed in touch. We weren't bound by bitterness anymore, but by survival. Two men who had escaped the same trap. And for the first time in years, I started living without fear and no more wondering who she was calling. No more sleepless nights staring at the ceiling. No more second-guessing every word that left her mouth. My life, once a stage for her performance, was mine again. I won't lie and say it was easy. There were moments when anger surged, moments when the memory of her laugh made me sick, moments when I questioned how I could have fallen for it all. But over time, those feelings faded. I began to understand that her lies didn't define me. They defined her. What defined me was how I chose to rise from it. That I invested my time into work, hobbies, and personal growth. I took trips I had always postponed. I picked up a guitar I hadn't touched in years. Slowly, the shadow she cast over my life disappeared, replaced by something brighter. And here's the thing. I don't regret exposing her the way I did. Not for a second. Because if I had just walked away quietly, she would have found her next target, her next wedding, her next victim. Instead, I ended the cycle. The dress that once symbolized her control became the evidence of her undoing. And me? I walked away not as her broken husband, but as the man who tore off her mask in front of the world. So here I am now, free, moving forward, and determined never to let anyone use me like that again. But I'll leave you with this question. Did I do the right thing by exposing her so publicly? Or should I have just walked away in silence? What would you have done if you were in my place? Make sure to subscribe so you don't miss more unbelievable stories like this. Leave a like if you enjoyed the ride, and drop a comment below. I really want to hear your thoughts.